Within the forest on the outskirts of a village lived a woodsman. A kind soul, the woodsman would gather logs to fuel the fires of every home through the cold winters of the area. Year after year, him and his trusty axe would gather lumber, deliver it to the townsfolk, and return home for rest. That is, until one late autumn night on the cusp of winter's grasp. As the wind howled past his ears, he heard on it the cry of a woman in the distance. Guided by his caring heart and lantern light, the woodsman followed the cry to a peaceful glade. There he saw a lady, cloaked in black furs and softly sighing the same phrase over and over into the wind.
Fire.
As the woodsman saw this mysterious stranger caught in the cold of the woods, he grabbed a handful of logs and, using the embers of his lantern, started a fire for her. As it roared to life, so too did the lady as she stood from the ground. As she stretched towards the moon, she reached what had to be 10 feet in height. Her pale skin the color of frost, her eyes and hair the shades of silver reflected on the moonlight. She was covered in black furs, luxurious jewelry, and extending from her back was a pair of beautiful moth wings. As the woodsman stared in awe at the lady, she spoke in a quiet but elegant tone.
I am the Queen of Moths, and I am grateful for this gift of fire you have brought me,
she said, the woodsman nodding his head in appreciation. He had never seen such a being of odd yet magical grace. She continued,
I fear that the winds will soon blow out its embers and it will dim. I request that you return tomorrow to further stoke its glorious flames.
Without much thought, the woodsman agreed, placing a few more logs onto the blazing fire. The Queen of Moths stared enthralled into the bonfire, and after the woodsman returned to his cabin, he did not shake the visage of this lady from his mind, and using his remaining timber, he began to carve a large wooden statue of Her Majesty. The following day he returned to her, and saw the fire had done as she thought. As its embers clung unto their fiery life, she turned to him with gratitude laced with expectancy. He decided it would be best to place more logs onto the fire, in hopes it would last longer, and so he did, twice as many as the night before, to which the fire grew high into the moonlit night above, lighting up the forest.
Thank you for your return, woodsman. May I expect you tomorrow as well?
She asked him, holding her authoritative posture. Of course, your highness, he replied, gathering up all the dry kindling he could to make sure this fire would last. As he finished up, he bid the queen farewell, but she did not seem to hear him over her trance towards the hypnotic blaze. He returned to his cabin with even less haul than before, and once again he continued to work on his effigy made of wood. This continued for many weeks, and as time trudged on, so too came winter. The air turned cold and snow covered the ground. Yet every day the woodsman returned to the queen in the woods to fuel her fire, each day using more logs than the previous. The village grew cold as the woodsman's visits grew scarce, and their hearths remained dim, as did the woodsman's own cabin. After a month of deliveries, the woodsman found himself with but only a few logs for his own use, and a single lantern left to light. Forced to choose between the queen's warmth and his own, he returned to the glade with nothing but a lantern. There he saw the queen stood in front of her burning pyre, looking at it with an almost divine appreciation. I am sorry, your majesty, but I am afraid I cannot spare any more logs. My home grows cold with the winter, and I fear for the townsfolk as well, said the woodsman, who averted his eyes from the queen's as she turned to him. She carried on, I hope that this fire will burn bright and long through the winter, so you may stay warm yourself. As he said the final words, his eyes turned up to meet the queen's, but what he saw was not sympathy nor understanding, but anger.
What do you speak of warmth, woodsman? I care not for the fire's warmth, but its light. I demand the embers that fly into the sky, and the flames that dance with more than grace in anything imaginable. I demand you bring me more logs to stoke their performance,
bellowed the queen, now leaned down to face the woodsman. In frustration over her vanity, the woodsman kicked the snow beneath his boot, which landed on the flame and caused it to dim slightly. Now enraged by this ignorance, the queen's wings began to buzz as she took to the skies, letting out a screech that shook the trees. Suddenly, a horde of hundreds of moths took to the skies behind her, blotting out the moon.
If you will not give me lumber to stoke my fire, then I will use you to do so,
she roared, before flying towards the woodsman, who turned and ran away. As he took off into the woods, the thrum of the insects filled his ears. Had he not been so accustomed to the forest bramble, he would surely have been caught, but he was swift from years of walking it. As he arrived at his cabin, he thought quickly of what to do, as the queen was not far behind. Then he saw it. His carvings were made from wood. As the Queen of Moths broke into the clearing, followed by her court, the woodsman cried out to her, Here you are, your majesty. Here is your gift of fire. followed by him throwing his lantern onto the wooden carvings. They burst into flames which pierced the cold night, in which his glow was caught in the eye of the queen. Blinded by its apparent splendor, the queen flew into the fire, only to be greeted by its painful heat. She shrieked into the night as the Moth she commanded followed her, but she soon was turned to ashes and embers. As the woodsman approached, he saw that the embers were different. They burned not just with firelight, but moonlight as well, and they held strong despite the pounding winds. Seeing their magic, he gathered as many as he could and returned to the village with his remaining logs. The woodsman went on to light all of the fires of the village using the embers, which burnt through all of the winter due to the queen's magic within them. For many years the woodsman used these embers, and from then on he never let obsession get in the way of his health and duty, unlike what the queen had done.